In 2022, a Russian oligarch sent literal bailiffs into an F1 paddock and nearly stranded an entire team in the Netherlands. In 2018, an energy drink company signed one of the biggest sponsorship deals in the sport's history, with £581 in the bank. And in 1989, a man who didn't actually have a supercomputer convinced the world of finance that he did, bought an F1 team with the money, then set his own Porsche on fire when it all fell apart. These are not rumors. These all happened. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why Formula One keeps falling for the same trap over and over again. The biggest sponsorship scandals in Formula One history. The original Ponzi scheme, Moneytron and Onyx. To understand just how far back F1's problems with dodgy money go, you need to travel to Belgium, 1989, and you need to meet a man named Jean-Pierre Van Rossum. Van Rossum was, by most accounts, one of the strangest human beings ever to walk into an F1 paddock. Former heroin addict, author of a guide to Belgian brothels, owner of 108 Ferraris, a super yacht, and a private jet, and a self-proclaimed financial genius who had built a supercomputer, codenamed the Moneytron, that could predict the stock market perfectly. Investors gave him hundreds of millions, and why wouldn't they? The returns were extraordinary. But here's the thing, the Moneytron wasn't real. Behind the locked door where Van Rossum claimed the machine lived, there were just some cooling fans. The whole thing was a Ponzi scheme, new investors' money paying off the old ones. And it worked for a while. Flush with cash that wasn't his, Van Rossum bought into the Onyx F1 team in 1989. Suddenly, his Moneytron logo was plastered all over the cars, the money was flowing into the paddock, and for one brief, shining season, it looked like a real operation. Onyx even scored a podium finish in Portugal. Then Van Rossum started to unravel. He announced a major engine deal with Porsche on Belgian television, before Porsche had made any official statement. Porsche, understandably, canceled the deal on the spot. That same night, Van Rossum drove his Porsche to a town square in Brussels and set it on fire. Whether that was protest, theater, or a full psychological breakdown, nobody is entirely sure. Things only got worse from there. He started calling F1 boss Bernie Ecclestone a mafia boss in the press, and accused FIA president Jean-Marie Balestre of being a Nazi, claims that got him banned from the paddock entirely. With no engine deal and no paddock access, Van Rossum walked away from the sport. In 1991, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for fraud. His empire was gone. The Onyx team sold off and stripped of funding, folded in 1990. But here's what makes this story more than just a historical curiosity. Nobody in F1 learned the lesson, because less than 30 years later, almost exactly the same thing happened again, except this time, the product didn't even exist. The Phantom Menace, Rich Energy, and Haas. Let's talk about Rich Energy, or more specifically, let's talk about why nobody could find a can of it anywhere. In late 2018, the Haas F1 team, an American outfit that had been struggling to attract a major sponsor, announced a title sponsorship deal with Rich Energy, a self-described premium British performance drink. The car got a striking new black and gold livery. CEO William Storey showed up to the launch, declaring that Rich Energy would destroy Red Bull on and off the track. It sounded huge, it looked huge, and almost immediately people started asking questions. Where could you actually buy this drink? Storey's answer was vague. How was an energy drink company funding an F1 title sponsorship? Typically a deal worth tens of millions of pounds. What investigators eventually uncovered was this. In 2017, the year before Rich Energy announced its intention to buy into F1, the company had £581 in the bank. £581, the cost of a mid-range office chair. But somehow, the Haas deal got done, and the 2019 season began. Then came White Bikes. White Bikes, a British cycling company, took Rich Energy to court, claiming that the stag logo on the Haas car was a direct copyright infringement of their own logo, which the court agreed. The judge ruled that Storey had personally been involved in manufacturing documents during the case and called his evidence incorrect or misleading. Rich Energy had to remove the logo from the car. That alone should have ended it. But this is where it gets truly unhinged. The eve of the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, a tweet from Rich Energy's official account announced that the company was terminating its Haas sponsorship immediately, citing the team's poor performance. Story then called the Haas car a milk float in an interview with The Sun. Rich Energy's own shareholders immediately came out and said Story had acted entirely alone without authority. Story then accused his shareholders of staging a palace coup. They denied it. It devolved into a full public meltdown, conducted entirely via Twitter, while one of the biggest races of the season was happening in the background. Haas ended the sponsorship, officially by mutual consent, later that season. Rich Energy rebranded as Lightning Volt and went into liquidation, and William Story, remarkably, went on to pull the exact same stunt with a British superbike team. Haas had been chasing desperately needed sponsor money. They found someone willing to promise it, and they paid the price. Which brings us to the biggest financial fraud in Formula One history: the crypto crash. FTX and Mercedes. By 2021, Formula One was in the middle of a full crypto gold rush. Blockchain companies and crypto exchanges were desperate for prestige, and F1 teams were desperate for cash. It was a match made in, well, not heaven as it turned out. No deal was bigger than the one between the dominant Mercedes-AMG Petronas team and a crypto exchange called FTX. Signed in September 2021, the partnership put the FTX logo on championship-winning cars, on Lewis Hamilton's race suit, across the entire team's operation. The man behind FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried, was being described by major media outlets as a visionary. Forbes had him on their covers. He'd testified before the US Congress on crypto regulation, apparently the voice of reason in an unruly industry. Then, in November 2022, it emerged that FTX was not a stable, well-run exchange. Bankman-Fried had been secretly funneling billions of dollars of customer money into his personal hedge fund, using it for risky bets, political donations, and personal spending. When it unraveled, there was an $8 billion hole where customer assets should have been. FTX filed for bankruptcy in a matter of days, triggering a market panic across the entire crypto industry. Mercedes moved with extraordinary speed. Before the next race in Brazil, every FTX logo was stripped from the cars, the garage, the hospitality trucks, everything. Toto Wolff, Mercedes team principal, said he was in utter disbelief and admitted it exposed just how unregulated and volatile the crypto sector really was. Bankman-Fried was arrested, tried, and in November 2023, convicted on all 7 counts of fraud and money laundering. On March 28, 2024, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison and ordered to forfeit $11 billion. The crypto crash left the whole paddock spooked. Teams quietly stepped back from crypto deals. New due diligence was discussed. And then we get to the story that proves F1 still hasn't fully solved the problem, because this one ended with bailiffs. The geopolitical fallout, Uralkali and Haas. It's 2021. Haas is back, and once again, they need money. This time, the money comes from Uralkali, one of the largest potash fertilizer companies in the world, and one of Russia's biggest corporations. The deal is straightforward on paper. Haas gets significant funding, the car gets Russian flag colors, and Nikita Mazepin, son of Uralkali's billionaire owner, Dmitry Mazepin, gets a race seat. Kevin Magnussen, a genuinely fast and experienced driver, gets dropped to make room. The fan reaction is immediate and hostile. Mazepin struggles on track all season, frequently finishing last, and becomes a lightning rod for criticism. Then, on February 24, 2022, Russia invades Ukraine. The world responds with sweeping sanctions. Both Dmitry Mazepin and Nikita are placed on the EU and UK sanctions lists. The FIA revokes the racing licenses of all Russian drivers. Haas, with a Russian-flagged car and a sanctioned sponsor, has no real choice. They terminate both contracts simultaneously. Mazepin is out, Uralkali is out, the Russian colors are stripped from the car. And in a moment that the internet absolutely loved, Kevin Magnussen gets a call and is back in the seat within hours. Haas had done the right thing, but Uralkali wasn't finished. The company demanded a refund on the $13 million it had already paid for the 2022 season and took the dispute to a Swiss arbitration tribunal. The tribunal ruled that Haas had just cause to terminate the deal given the circumstances, completely rejecting Uralkali's claim that the contract had been broken. However, the panel also ruled that Haas had to refund the portion of the payment covering the races that were never held. Haas agreed to pay, and then didn't. By August 2024, the money still hadn't arrived, so Uralkali escalated to Dutch courts, obtained a provisional ruling, and sent bailiffs, actual bailiffs with police, into the Haas paddock at the Dutch Grand Prix in Zandvoort. The team's equipment was inventoried. Their trucks were prohibited from leaving the country. Haas was at genuine risk of missing the Italian Grand Prix the following weekend. The payment was eventually processed that Friday. Uralkali confirmed receipt on Sunday morning. The trucks were released. Haas made it to Monza, barely. It is, without question, the most surreal paddock scene in recent Formula One history. And it started with a sponsorship deal. In every single one of these stories, An F1 team was desperate for money. A sponsor showed up with a compelling pitch, and due diligence took a backseat to financial need. Van Rossum's Ponzi scheme, Rich Energy's empty bank account, FTX's fraudulent exchange, Uralkali's political liability, none of these were impossible to spot in advance, but the chase for funding made them easy to overlook. Formula One is the most expensive sport on earth to compete in. The pressure to find sponsors is relentless, and that pressure will keep creating vulnerabilities, no matter how many times the sport gets burned. If you want to go deeper on any of these stories, let us know in the comments. And if there's a scandal we didn't cover, and there are plenty, drop it below. We'll see you in the next one at Evolution Athletics.